Good morning. Welcome to University Baptist Church. I'm standing here in an empty sanctuary. This is not how I'm used to gathering in this space, but this is an unusual time. And so this morning we're going to try something a little bit different. We're going to have a Bible study through live streaming. So the reason we're doing this, of course, is because of the COVID-19 virus, and we want to be respectful and practice social distancing so that we can help flatten that curve so that we don't spread it even more. As I thought about what we could talk about today and what might be helpful, I thought about biblical responses to a time of crisis. And because we don't know how long this will go, we can have a study like this that can go on into the future, and we can address different ways that the Bible talks about times of crisis. So today we have a handout, and for many of you, you may not have had a chance to get that handout yet, but if you go to University Baptist Church and type in BR2C_session1, you can find a link to download that handout. That's universitybaptist.org, BR2C_session1, and then you can download the handout. This coming week, we'll have the handout available by Wednesday so that for next week, we can all have had a chance to prepare. Now, we're using YouTube to live stream this, so you'll be able to comment as we go through this. And when you do, I can hopefully respond to those comments. Now, there's a lag between when I'm speaking in real time and when you're seeing it. So if you comment and I seem to just continue talking, then I will try to do my best to get back to it. So this morning, we're talking about biblical responses to a crisis. And the focus today is God is still God. And I want to do a study on Psalm 4. So to begin, let's read this passage together. If you have a Bible, I encourage you to open your Bible and look at Psalm number 4. And we will then talk about it and talk about how it relates to times of crisis like this. The psalmist writes, "Answer me when I call, O God of my right. You gave me room when I was in distress. Be gracious to me and hear my prayer. How long, you people, shall my honor suffer shame? How long will you love vain words and seek after lies? But know that the Lord has set apart the faithful for himself. The Lord hears when I call to him. When you are disturbed, do not sin. Ponder it on your beds and be silent. Offer right sacrifices and put your trust in the Lord. There are many who say, 'Oh, that we might see some good. Let the light of your face shine upon us, O Lord.' You've put gladness in my heart, more than when their grain and wine abound. I will both lie down and sleep in peace. For you alone, O Lord, make me lie down in safety." This is Psalm number 4. And as we get into this passage, I'd like to invite you to think a little bit about things that are helpful and things that are not helpful. If you had had a chance to look at this before we were gathering together online this morning, I would have invited you to make a list. But as you're listening to me and as you're looking at this, if you want to make a comment about some things that are helpful, some things that are not helpful, we'll try to talk about those and share them with everybody else. So let's think about some things that are not helpful. What are some things that during this time are not helpful? What do people sometimes do that isn't very effective? I've heard about people making a run on toilet paper And that seems just so disconnected from anything that would work. Some people have been self-quarantining long before anything really was spreading, but maybe that was a good precautionary step. What are some things that are helpful? Washing our hands, using hand sanitizer. I see one comment, it's not helpful to panic. That's echoed by another. And there are so many ways that people can respond when there is a time of crisis that seems to foster not just negativity, but it takes people away from things that can be, that are solutions. So if you think of anything that's helpful or not helpful, feel free to say it in the comments and we'll come back to it. But I thought as we got into this passage, that would be a good place to wrestle with a biblical response to a time of crisis, because everybody feels this need to do something. We want to act. We don't want to just sit back. False information is absolutely not helpful. I saw an email this week from someone who was trying to do something proactive and sent a message saying, you can do this to avoid the spread of the coronavirus, and then later on had to follow up with an email that clarified, saying, actually those were not helpful suggestions. They not only were not helpful, but the suggestion in that email didn't help avoid spreading the virus at all. So let's jump into Psalm number 4 and talk a little bit about how that psalm is dealing with a time of crisis. So in Psalm 4, we find this, like so many others, is connected to another psalm. So Psalm 4 is very closely connected to Psalm number 3. Some scholars even suggest that they were part of a single unit at some point. And if we look at the flow in our Bibles and jump to the very end of Psalm 3, verse 8, that's actually the launch point for Psalm number 4. Deliverance belongs to the Lord. May your blessing be on your people. So that is the starting point for then Psalm 4, which begins, answer me when I call. Deliverance belongs to the Lord, Psalm 3:8. Answer me when I call. So there's this word of faith that leads right into this word of requesting God's help. Psalm 4 is, like so many others, an individual prayer for help. And these individual prayers for help are by far the most numerous in the Psalms. And here's the typical pattern. Someone's in trouble. The person cries out to God. The person wants God to save him or her. The Psalms of lament or of individual prayer are typically written in the first person. So Psalm 4:1, answer me when I call. It's a petition. Look at verse 2. How long will my honor suffer shame? Psalm 4 has someone in crisis because of some specific reasons. Look at verse 2. How long will you love vain words and seek after lies? There's also concern in verses 6 and 7 about material possessions. So when you look at this psalm, it follows this pattern quite clearly of these psalms that are pleas for God's help. So if you did get a chance to download the handout, you'll notice that we are going from the background of the psalm to the question about what kind of crisis does the psalmist face. And we can then take that question and make a leap into what kind of crisis we face. So there were two primary concerns in Psalm 4. The psalmist was worried about the reputation, this person's reputation, and there was concern about material possessions. So the reputation we see in verse 2 and the material possessions in verses 6 and 7. And so when we talk about this kind of concern over a personal crisis, we can take that as a logical step to talk about the crisis that we're facing right now in our country. So the question for you, and maybe we can talk about this a little bit in the comments, would be, what is the crisis that we face? What is the biggest thing that we have to worry about right now? I know that for people in high-risk categories, health is a big concern, and legitimately so. I mean, for people who are in high-risk categories, it's really hard to see something like this COVID-19 virus and to kind of go through each day with the uncertainty of what's next. So the psalmist is facing these two crises, one about his or her, presumably his in this case, but it really isn't gendered. It's reputation and material possessions, reputation and poverty, social reputation and reputation of the social reputation, and then also material possessions and how to get through. But what about us? What's the crisis that we're facing right now? The crisis is any time of difficulty or trouble or danger. A crisis can take many different forms. A crisis can be one that is personal, or it can be one that is collective. A crisis can be something that is even an opportunity. And the theme that we're looking at this morning is that God is still God, so that even in this time of crisis, we can move through it with this sort of recognition that God is bigger than this crisis and God will overcome it. When we look at Psalm 4, maybe sometimes we don't immediately jump to this as crisis literature. You know, if we look at this passage again and just kind of go through it, answer me when I call, O God of my right. You gave me room when I was in distress. Be gracious to me and hear my prayer. How long, you people, shall my honor suffer shame? How long will you love vain words and seek after lies? But know that the Lord has set apart the faithful for himself. The Lord hears when I call to him. When you're disturbed, don't sin. Ponder it in your beds and be silent. Offer sacrifices and put your trust in the Lord. This verse number 5 could be a word for the one who is causing the problem or for the psalmist. And I think that can speak to us today. Offer sacrifices and put your trust in the Lord can translate to our modern responses of looking for helpful ways to respond, looking for productive things to do, looking for positive ways to step forward. There are many who say, oh, that we might see some good. Let the light of your face shine upon us, O Lord. You have put gladness in my heart, more than when their grain and wine abound. I will both lie down and sleep in peace, for you alone, O Lord, make me lie down safely. This end is one of hope. It's one of recognizing that God is still present. God is still speaking. So we can take this question forward. Will God deliver us? It would be great to sort of go forward with all of the uncertainty and everything that we're facing right now and just be able to give this unequivocal yes. But that might feel a little bit disingenuous to the nature of God and the way we can frame the situation. We ask if God will deliver, and we mean, will God deliver me from this right now? Will God deliver me to an outcome I can imagine? The ripple effects of all of this are enormous. As we look at the way this COVID-19 is spreading, and we look at the impact that it has on not just the stock market, but the entire economy and the way that it will ripple around. Does that mean we should panic? Absolutely not. Does that mean we should blithely move forward with no care or concern? No, not that either. But we can still ask this question, will God deliver? And when we do, we join the chorus of the psalmist. The gospel teaches us that Jesus has the power to overcome death, and God has dominion over everything in this world. And so when we look at uncertain times, crisis moments, we really don't have anything to fear because God is more powerful than everything, even death. Yet we can lose sight of God's power and focus on all the times things don't work out. I see that we've got a few more people joining us, and so I just want to give an update on what we're doing. We're looking at Psalm number 4, and we're talking about crisis literature in the Bible. We're looking at biblical responses to times of crisis. And this morning, we're looking at this idea that God is still God no matter what is happening. God is still in control. God is still powerful. And so in Psalm 4, we find this dialogue between a person and God. And this dialogue is tailor-made for just such an occasion as this. Things hadn't worked out the way the psalmist wanted them to. It was the feeling of someone lying in bed, up late one night worrying. And the handout, if you could put that link back up on the screen, if you've had a chance to download that, on the handout I put a quote by a man named James Lindbergh, and it says, "It was one of those nights when I was lying awake, babysitting the world." I think about that quote for this time right now as we try to stay abreast of the information, listen to news, stay informed, but at the same time, lying awake in bed, worrying about everything, or babysitting the world doesn't help. It's no more effective than stockpiling toilet paper so that presumably you'd just never have to buy it again, I guess. But I wonder if there are some ways that we actively babysit the world. I wonder if there are ways that we try to live out our lives in a way that we give energy and focus to things that we really can't impact. In a time of crisis, worrying creeps in. And worrying can then end up taking the place of productive steps. We've heard it again and again. Hand washing, using hand sanitizer, practicing social distancing. We hear again and again how there are some positive steps that we can take. There are more. There are actually a lot more. But I want to continue with Psalm number 4 right now, and then we're going to come back to positive steps. In the psalm, the very first word is answer me. And maybe answer me could be the tagline that goes alongside God is still God. Because answer me has this implication that there is a dialogue partner, a divine, holy other, the eternal ground of our being. There is something out there with which we can engage. There is a way for us to be able to reach out beyond what we can see, beyond what we can understand, beyond what we can know, and talk to something that has the capacity to respond. This quote, it was one of those nights when I was lying awake babysitting the world, is sort of the antithesis of, answer me. You are God. You are capable. Because when we lie awake in our beds and we babysit the world, then we're saying to God, I hear you. I realize there is this conversation, but yet I don't want to be a part of it. I've shared this story once before, I think in this very room, but some who may be watching may not have heard it, or may be a blessing to hear it again. But it was, when I think about that, answer me from the psalmist, I think back to a time when I was in first grade. My teacher, Mrs. Chamberlain, was so upset. Someone had destroyed a textbook. I knew exactly what had happened because I saw it happen. She lined us all up in a row, and she shouted at us, "Who did this? Answer me," she said. I saw it was Kenny Gregorowitz, and he took the textbook and he pushed as hard as he could on each side, and the binding gradually broke and it bent. And I watched him do it. I was really impressed that he was strong enough to do that. We were in first grade. But her strong admonition frightened me way too much to say anything. So as she shouted, "Answer me," we all sat there, and finally Kenny couldn't face the pressure any longer and confessed. And I just felt so bad for him. But the psalmist is turning to God and saying that same demand, "Answer me, God." And we can engage with God in this divine dialogue to say, what are you doing? Where are you? And we can say it in faith that God hears us, and in faith that God answers. And in faith that God is listening. The psalmist has this same tone. Psalm 4 is about your concerns, my concerns. It's about everything in the world that really matters. And it's almost like it's specifically about this moment with COVID-19. How long shall I suffer? How long do we face this uncertainty? It's a direct cry to God when things aren't going well. But it's not just a cry, it's a conviction that God does listen and does respond. And the most beautiful part of Psalm 4 is that it ends in faith. It ends with God in control. For you alone, O Lord, make me lie down in safety. For you alone, O Lord, make me lie down in safety. It seems like some people in the community were spreading these false rumors about the psalmist, and the psalmist was wrestling with the eroding reputation. How long will this go on? So we can take that same question to heart and ask it about the world right now, and specifically the one thing everybody seems to only be thinking about, the coronavirus. How long will this go on? And just like the psalmist, we don't know the answer. We don't know how long it will go on. But the psalmist is confident that God is listening and aware. Something shifts in Psalm 4. Maybe the danger is past. Maybe the psalmist's own words began to sink in. Maybe the psalmist worshiped and felt better. Maybe the psalmist listened to an old hymn and felt that sense of peace that those familiar words can bring. Maybe the psalmist went outside, a place where one can practice social distancing, but experience the beauty of creation. Maybe the psalmist experienced God in the woods or on a mountain. Maybe the psalmist read some good news somewhere, or saw a study that social distancing was reducing the spread of COVID-19. Maybe the psalmist read about a new treatment. No matter what, there's more joy than when the prayer started, and the psalmist can now sleep in peace. As we look at this passage and we look at what the Bible says about these times of crisis, and we wrestle with this idea that God is still God, even in the midst of this, we can ask honestly, does life serve up these happy endings? Sometimes. Every story in our lives overlaps with every other one. And right now, the unique part of this situation is we're all going through it together at the same time. We don't have to lie awake and babysit the world because God is still God and we can move forward positively. I saw a church sign that said, "Don't let worry kill you. Let the church help." I don't think it came out the way they meant for it to. Of course, it's a blooper, but that sign really is trying to point to the idea that the church can help alleviate worries. Can it? We still have worries. We still have things to be concerned about. We still want to be vigilant in trying to prevent the spread of COVID-19. But the truth is, even in times of crisis like this, we don't have anything to fear. No matter what happens, no matter how good or how bad, God is still God. God holds on to us. And so no matter what happens, God's in control and it's going to be okay. So now I want to try asking another question again. So if you're watching and you want to comment, what are some helpful and unhelpful ideas? We've already talked about some of the unhelpful ones. Panicking, I think we mentioned earlier. Spreading false rumors. I think I would add to that list binge buying toilet paper, or for that matter, binge buying anything doesn't seem very helpful. Spreading any kind of rumors, that doesn't seem like that would be helpful. I don't know if anybody who's watching has any others that you'd like to add to that list, but something that we can look at things that are helpful too. I see walks in the woods as a helpful suggestion. Absolutely. Going outside and breathing in the outdoor air is always going to be restorative. Washing our hands. I've mentioned a number of times practicing social distancing. Spending time with family. Another thing that we can do is make productive use of the time. Reading. I'm using this as an opportunity to study our Bibles. Praying. Slowing down. For some people, some of this self-quarantining could even be a gift. To be able to practice the discipline of being quiet, of being still, of listening to what God is saying, to being present right now in this moment with those who we do get to be around. We can call people, text them, message them, and give encouraging words. I like that one, just came up on the chat, counting blessings. and then naming them one by one. Another thing that is more challenging, but if you're in a low-risk category, volunteer to help someone who's in a higher risk category. For example, I know of a church member who volunteered to help some of our older members by going and getting groceries or medicines or running other errands that they need. And as long as we're vigilant in how we transfer those medicines, groceries, or anything else, we can mitigate the risk of continuing to spread the virus. God is still God. God is still in control. God is present, active, and listening. And Psalm 4 says that so clear and so loud, even in times like this. It can give words to our concerns and can be a starting point for our own dialogue with God. If you have had a chance to download the handout, there's a closing prayer right at the end. And so wherever you are, I invite you to join me with this closing prayer. And if you don't have it, please listen along, and we will, hopefully you'll have the handout next week. Let's pray. Gracious and loving Lord, you hold the world in your hands. We trust you and acknowledge that you are still God. As we face uncertainty, we do not have to ask whether or not you will deliver us. We know you are capable. We know you hold the present and the future. We know you hold us. Help us live with confidence in your grace, love, and strength. Amen.